Welcome to this edition of At the Mic. I am your host, Keith Malinak. I am so grateful that you make time for the Thursday deep dive as you have today. Thank you so much. And oh my goodness, do we have a conversation today that we are going to be bringing in my guest here momentarily, who is a survivor of MKUltra. And MKUltra, not a conspiracy theory. No, it's definitely not. It is an absolute real thing that your tax dollars helped fund. One thing we often do on this program is unveil atrocities that have been done with your tax dollars and in your name many times. And today we do need to get into the topic of MKUltra and its very real victims and what has been perpetrated on so many unwilling participants. So I do hope you're having a good day today. I want to make sure that you're aware that the show is available. Let me get the annoying banner off of there. I'm sorry. The show is available at themicshow.com. Hero West always putting everything up there. If you don't know the routine, it's live now on X, obviously. And then tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern, it's going to be available on YouTube and Rumble. And then tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern, it then appears magically on Spotify and iTunes and other locales, all thanks to Wes. Be sure to follow him at Second Floor Dallas on X. That is Wes's handle. And don't forget, we've got Gabby, who is at Jeffy Apologist. Got my fancy computer graphics here. She runs the Instagram pages at the Mike Show. Follow her over there and all the great stuff that she does for this show. So thank you again for making time to join us. Let me get my guest in here, Bill Yarborough. Bill, welcome into the program, sir. I'm grateful that you made time today, and I will say that this has to be difficult for you to relive and talk about, but I think it's important, and I appreciate you making time, sir.
Well, thank you for having me on, Keith. Appreciate
it. Absolutely. So you're the author of the book, Memories of MKUltra. It's available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Please check this book out. There's so much to this conversation. We're going to see how much of it that we're able to cover today because it is very involved. And I honestly, here's what I want to do, Bill. Let's see if you'll be up for having a conversation that starts with the history of the program. Let's go way back. Let's go to the 50s and 60s, work our way up to when it involved you, and then right up to today. Are you up for that?
Sure.
Okay, very good. Okay, so for those that may not be, and you please, at any point, Bill, that I have something wrong, jump in there, interrupt me. Please don't let me speak erroneously on anything because there's so much to this topic and I don't want to screw it up. But I guess, long story short, what would you say? The MKUltra was our government's experimenting on unwilling participants, mind control, basically, right?
Mind control and several other things surrounding that we'll get into.
Okay. All right. So I guess the story picks up really in Nazi Germany, right?
That's where they started experimenting first. Yeah, Hitler had an interest in it for sure.
Yeah, and so then out of World War II, we then get into Operation Paperclip, and a lot of people are familiar with it, but a lot of people are not. Could you please explain Operation Paperclip as we begin to tell this story of MKUltra?
Sure. So after World War II was over, the United States, and actually, the Soviet Union as well, began to look at talent that they could get out of the remains of Nazi Germany and bring them to the United States. So the most famous case of Werner von Braun is he was Hitler's chief rocket engineer, and he designed and actually oversaw the building of them, and the V-2 rockets, bombed London and did a lot of damage. So not a popular figure over there. But when the war was over, the United States decided that, God, it would be great to bring him over because he was way ahead of where we were in rocket engineering and put him in charge of our rocket program. So he basically was. He developed the rockets for all of the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo. He designed the Saturn V rocket that got us to the moon.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I'm going to be talking about some connections in my family that are involved with Operation Paperclip. So actually, Vernon von Braun, his mother was my mother's godmother.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I don't think he was involved with MKUltra. He was very involved, of course, with the space program, the rocket program. But that's an interesting thing. The other thing about my family that's particularly important is I mentioned for rocket engineering they were interested in, but they were also interested in people that were developing things in Nazi Germany involving biochemistry or chemical warfare. So they tried to bring those people over. And then one of the reasons that they did that is because the Nazis did experiments that up until that time at least America would never do. So these people experimented on live humans, and they learned from it. So we wanted to get that knowledge. But they also did mind control at Dachau and some other of the prison camps. And so my father, I was a soldier in World War II, but when it was over, his sister had married a German, and her husband had died in the war, and she had 4 kids. So he decided to stay there and help her out. He was a lawyer and joined the War Crimes Branch. And the War Crimes Branch, went in there to interview the SS officers that ran the death camps and to look for crimes against humanity. But they also had the secret mission of Operation Paperclip, that if anybody looked like they had expertise we could use, they would put a paperclip on their file.
Wow.
And it would be evaluated. And, no matter how many people they might have slaughtered, been involved with slaughtering at the death camps, that was forgiven, and they were given a new identity and brought to the United States. So
wow.
Part of the individuals who belonged to MKUltra were those folks. And I think that's somehow how we got sucked into it, and I'll get into that more later. But I think my father would have known some of these people that came in to work in the MKUltra program. It was also Japan. The imperialist Japanese, had expertise too. So they look for individuals, particularly I think it came with weapons and chemical warfare to come to the U.S. as well.
So do we know? And that's fascinating. I've known what Operation Paperclip was all about, but I was not aware of where it got that name. And that is fascinating. And that's they put it in the files to kind of earmark some of the people that might have some I almost said good, some useful information or expertise for Americans and our government. Okay.
I mean, they did not keep it a secret that Vernon von Braun, came over. That was very well publicized. But these mind control folks, that was very much under wraps.
So do we know what MKUltra stands for? I always assumed it was mind control, ultra top secret, something like that. Do you know if that's accurate? I'm not positive.
Well, there's a bit of controversy. I've actually talked to, people who were in the CIA, several individuals, and they helped me out some there. But basically, MK was used for the technical service group for any project they created. So it was, and then there was a dash, and they gave them names, and most of them were just randomly chosen, but some people believe, and some, good authors on the topic think that Ultra was because it was ultra secret, ultra sensitive, and that's why it was given the Ultra.
Okay, I mean, this is a very dark topic that I should have been clearer on, I think, at the beginning here. We're going to get into some stuff here that has happened through the CIA in the MKUltra program. And the fact that that the root of this nasty tree is Nazi Germany says it all, quite frankly. And there's a case with Jimmy Shaver in the 1950s. I don't have the exact year here, but my understanding and my reading and listening to other shows on this topic, it's almost like that was the beginning of this. And Jimmy Shaver was, it's believed. I don't know that it's ever been proven, but it's believed that he was a victim of MKUltra.
Right.
And the way the story goes is a little girl named, is it Cherie Jo Horton? She was, I forget how old, maybe 4 years old. She's very young, and she is left in the parking lot with her brother in the family vehicle while the parents go into this bar near the base there, and she is raped and murdered. And it's by Jimmy Shaver is how they trace it back. And so I don't know how much you can speak to this case, but if I recall, it was under hypnosis that he, I guess, admitted to the crime. I don't know, admittedly, too much about it other than just he's believed to be patient zero, if I'm not mistaken. Do you have any knowledge on that case?
Well, I've heard of the case, and I haven't done extensive research on it,
yeah.
but I don't think he was patient zero.
Oh,
based
okay.
on when that occurred, they were doing that kind of stuff, starting in the 50s,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's right. Because we have Frank Olson,
yeah,
who jumped out of a window after being slipped LSD that he wasn't knowledgeable about, and in fact, President Ford ended up apologizing to
That's correct.
Frank Olson's family in the 70s. So,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating, and we need to get through the story of how it was even revealed, the whole project.
Okay, well, and that's a good place to go on how it was revealed. They did keep it very secret. I've met people who were in the CIA back then who said they had no idea.
Very few were aware of this, correct?
Very few was aware. It was very sensitive for obvious reasons, and so I might talk a little bit first about a few things they did that would give your listeners an idea. A lot of them probably know this, but they used electric shock, and they used psychedelic drugs, and they used isolation, and they used psychological assault, and other forms of torture.
Yeah. And
it's not so much just that they did those things, but with some people, they did them to extreme degrees that created vegetable-like states. So those are some of the reasons why they wanted to keep it. They clearly violated, ethical issues and legal issues.
And on American citizens too.
Yeah, on American citizens, Canadian citizens, some German citizens, and they. So it actually started in 53. It ran through Lyndon Johnson, shut it down in 64. There was another project that took over after it called MK Search that continued the psychic stuff, and I'll talk, more about that later because that was a big part of it. And so a couple of things happened. In 1973, the New York Times put out a front page article dealing with how Nixon, and this was part of the Watergate scandal, was using the CIA illegally. So that was the first kind of big revelation that Nixon was doing that. But it did not have anything to do with MKUltra.
Right.
And then another individual in 74 published an article about what he called widespread illegal domestic CIA activity. Their charter is international, not domestic.
Right.
Yeah. So they were very involved in, bugging, the hippie leaders, like those organizations that the Black Panthers or the SDS, there were a number of them. So, so the Senate decided, okay, this doesn't sound good, what happened with the CIA and Watergate, and now we're hearing about all this other stuff that was going on. So we're going to investigate. Richard Helms was a director of the CIA for Nixon at that time. He actually started MKUltra. He was very involved in setting it up. So he immediately told Sidney Gottlieb, the individual who ran MKUltra for many years,
Right.
To destroy all the records. And he, before the Senate could subpoena them. And so they did, but they forgot about the financial records. And there was other records buried with those financial records. So, it was called the Church Committee of the United States Senate. Frank Church chaired the committee, and they began to get all of this documentation, and that led to MKUltra. You know, they got from the financial records. They had a whole list of every one of the 149 projects. And then they began to dig in, and a lot of the people who were involved was, of course, still living, because we're talking about 1975. You know, it wasn't that long ago that it was running. So they uncovered it, basically. And then, of course, a lot of journalists plunged in, and I guess one individual named Mark Roberts, he wrote The Search for the Manchurian, John Marks is his name, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. And so he, with the Freedom of Information Act, he got all the records and just went through them and dug out other things that the Church Committee didn't uncover. Also, President Ford created the Rockefeller Commission to investigate MKUltra as well. And as you mentioned, the Frank Olson incident came out of that. So that's basically how it got out there. What I guess we might get into is, you know, some people think that this was just the CIA. Basically, the CIA, they did operate some of these programs, but the vast majority of them, they funded other organizations to run them, oftentimes without letting them know that it was the CIA who was behind it. Sometimes they did know, but they went to major universities, you know, like Harvard, Stanford, major hospitals. They got other agencies.
Sure.
The federal government involved.
That's how we got the Unabomber.
The Unabomber, they claim, came from the Harvard program. Ken Kesey, you know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He worked at the mental hospital that MKUltra got to. So basically, he was actually aware that MKUltra was involved, or the CIA was involved, and so it and corporations. So, you know, the paranoia that existed over communism in the 1950s drove a lot of this. They were convinced the Russians were developing advanced mind control. And, you know, I'm sure a number of your listeners know about the McCarthy era, where, I mean, some people don't realize just how bad it got. I met an individual who worked at Berkeley University, you know, sort of the most radical university in the late 60s and early 70s, when that movement got going, when the counterculture was going on. And he said he was fired in his job in the 50s because he made several liberal statements.
Okay.
And so that was what it was like. So I guess what I want to point out is that some of these experiments were conducted by those kinds of institutions.
It's so interesting how the programs from this era all seem to point back to, well, we have to stop the communist takeover of the world.
Right.
And it's almost like a generation later, it was, well, we have to stop terrorism from taking over the world.
Right.
So that's how we justify. You always have to have, the government always has to have someone, a boogeyman, if you will. And I'm not saying there's not legitimate concerns on both communism and Islamic terrorism.
Absolutely.
That's not the case. The point is, you don't abuse Americans and take their civil liberties from them, and their right to their own bodily autonomy. And I want to get into your story, because the title of today's show is Surviving MKUltra, because that involves you and your story. And my goodness, like, how you walk us through, like, pick up the story wherever you want to. I don't know if you want to start when you were a child going through this, or would you rather pick it up later when you realized, oh my gosh, I went through MKUltra? Because I don't know, are you familiar with the show Alias at all, with Jennifer Garner from 20, 30 years ago? If not, that's okay.
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
It's effectively what you went through.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, that is right.
Tell us your story, however you feel.
And I think one more thing I want to hit upon from an historical standpoint before I go to that is just most people don't realize the enormous society impact on society MKUltra had. It's not just not these Americans that were experimented on, but what comes as a surprise to a lot of people is the CIA owned all the LSD in the world.
Yes.
They became obsessed. There was a predecessor to MKUltra called Artichoke, and before that it was Bluebird. And the guy that was running Artichoke heard that these Indian shamans had this magic mushrooms in Mexico that could provide a gateway into the divine. You could approach the infinite, communicate with entities unknown to science. And so he became obsessed with getting a hold of that. So Sidney Gottlieb, who took over, who set up MKUltra, knew about that. So he wanted to get into that. So one of the sub-projects of MKUltra was to hire this American banker who had gone to one of those secret ceremonies, and he would lead a CIA agent to that ceremony and get their hands on that magic mushroom. And so he didn't know the CIA was behind it, supposedly. And so the agent got it. He took it. He got very sick because he wasn't going into it for spiritual reasons, which is what the banker did. He actually wrote a big article in Life magazine about how wondrous this experience was, and in the 50s. And then Sidney Gottlieb, who was a chemist, the MKUltra people were, to a significant extent, chemists. They were at Fort Detrick, or then Camp Detrick, Maryland, where they were doing their chemical research, and they developed the drug psilocybin. So they took the LSD and the psilocybin and other psychedelics and sent them to the universities throughout the country.
I'm so grateful that you paused and visited that part of the story, because the drug culture of the 1960s is a direct result of the CIA funneling this stuff into onto college campuses, into urban centers. Right. I mean, and we've talked about this with the Colonel Towner Watkins on previous episodes here about the mic. I mean, it's absolutely insidious. So many things that our government has done to American citizens, and you can justify this stuff is all the way to you're blue in the face. But it's like it's almost like Operation Fast and Furious. Okay, right. Like, come on, really? That's what we're doing? We're giving guns and to drug cartels, and we're gonna track them. And it's the most convoluted justification every time. And I'm so glad that you hit the pause button there, because the drug culture of the 60s and then the war on drugs even later, a direct result of the CIA being America's pusher.
Right. I mean, it obviously did not turn out the way they wanted.
Or did it? I mean,
so
seriously.
Of course, they began to outlaw all of those drugs. But, Timothy Leary said, everything I am. He was the big drug guru, at Harvard University, the professor. And he said, everything I am, I owe to the foresight of the CIA scientists. John Lennon liked to say, we must always remember to thank the CIA and the Army for LSD.
Yeah.
So, but there are other societal impacts, and maybe I'll save that for later, but how they use the MKUltra manual to overthrow governments.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And those kind of things. But going back to my story now, I think I'll start out with just describing, what happened, and then I'll talk about how it came back to us. But yeah, in the summer of 1958, my brother, my sister, and my sister was 8, I was 4, my brother was 2, were placed into what I believe is a MKUltra program, in which they experimented upon us, and electric shock, psychedelic drugs, isolation. We all 3 independently remembered we were kept in jail cells.
Oh, gosh.
And, you know, went on. And it was, you know, very severe. We were separated from our parents. Luckily,
that's what I wanted to ask you. And I don't want you to leave out any detail that you're comfortable sharing. But that's the one question I want to ask from the get-go here is, what do you think your parents knew? And when you say separated from your parents and in a jail cell, how long of a stretch are we talking? Is this like a day camp where you're going for the day and you're getting picked up, or are you separated for a long period of time here, Bill?
Yeah, it was the summer of 1958, and we were completely separated. We were in my book, I call it the Gateway School, and there were other children there. And I do want to point out that a lot of the literature up until fairly recently really did not get into that this was done to children. I mean, but the book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, I don't think he makes any reference to that. But one of the best books is Poisoner in Chief by Stephen Kensler. And it was very well reviewed by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, NPR. And he gets into the fact they did this to kids. And he has 5 examples he goes into where they were given electric shock or drugs or isolated. So,
honestly, until your story, Bill, I didn't, and I think Kara even said something. Jeffy Apologist, that always assumed it would be adults. I had not heard children at all until getting familiar with your story before today's conversation.
Yeah, I mean, since we were talking about how it broke, the children's story broke really in the 1990s when President Clinton created the experiment on the Commission on Radiation Experiments, where the Army, exposed people without their consent or knowledge to radiation. I do want to add real quick that one good thing came out of the church hearing. The National Research Act they passed, and sometimes they say 73, sometimes they say 74. It mandated that all experiments on humans must have full disclosure and signed consent. Because it wasn't just the CIA who did this, it was universities and hospitals throughout the country that did these experiments without getting signed consent. And I met a woman who was in a mental hospital when she was young, and MKUltra experimented on her. She had no idea, she found out later. So that was good that I have friends who are in the medical research work, and they say, yeah, that stuff is now evolved. It's very much adhered to in the medical research community. So as far as she knows, and but this, they found out in these hearings that the CIA sprinkled radiation on children's cereal as one of the MKUltra projects. And so they had some children come testify before the committee, and these were not children, but these were adults who were children when that was done. And they said, well, can we tell you about all the other things they did? And that's when they got into the jail cells, the electric shock, the psychedelics, also the sex abuse, that went on. And so this was testimony. It was recorded. It went out on the internet, and so that's actually how we began to remember this stuff long before that committee was created. We remembered this stuff, but when that was put out there and articles were written about it, that's how we figured out it was the MKUltra program, because they said the exact same things that we remembered. And so, the, so yeah, they ended up not including that other stuff in their report since the charter was just radiation experiments. But that was another big way that the abuse of children was exposed. But back, any questions on that before I go back to our
Yeah.
story?
So that summer of 1958 is when this happened to you. Is that the entirety of the time frame that we're going to be addressing here, as far as what happened to you? Is it? I don't want to say confined, but is it that time period that we're talking about specifically?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
The summer of 1958.
Okay. So, and you were only 4, correct?
My sister was 8. My
Okay.
brother 2.
Okay. So 8, 4, and 2, you said, right?
Right.
Okay. So you were 4. What have you, and maybe your sister has more memories, I don't know, but can you walk us through that summer? In other words, were your parents saying, like, first of all, do you know what was it referred to in the family as, hey, we're taking you to day camp, or we're taking you, what was it called? And was it from start? I'm just trying to figure out, was it from start to finish? We drop you off in May, we pick you up in August, or was it everyday thing?
Yeah, no. It was not. It was, we were part of there's another book that I'll refer to later called The Shock Doctrine. Part of the MKUltra protocol was to put people into a state of shock immediately. So actually, the way they wanted to pick us up was they nabbed us in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. We lived, not that far from Washington, D.C., and I guess our parents knew they were going to pick us up there, but they may not have known the reason why they wanted us to pick us up that way. But so we felt like we were kidnapped.
Oh my
This guy just came and took us and then brought us to a psychiatrist office in Washington. And then he talked to us for a while, and then we were shipped off to rural Maryland where this program was being conducted. And the whole point of the reason why they do electric shock, and isolation, is to put the mind into a state of shock so it kind of collapses, and then you can program into it what you want.
Right.
I mean, that's kind of the essence of it.
And so as a child, you were having a day at the Smithsonian Institute and kidnapped, to your understanding.
Right.
But
exactly.
Your parents thought something different.
I'll talk about what our parents thought then.
Okay.
And it's the way my book opens,
Okay.
It opens with the kids being nabbed at the museum.
Yes. And let me get that title out there again before we get any further. The book is Memories of MKUltra by William Yarborough, and it's at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all of the places.
Yeah, many other places too.
Okay. Very good. There it is.
Yeah. So my brother and I remembered our parents saying to us, you're going to go to this special school, that's what they called it, and you're going to have fantastic futures. And that's kind of all I remember that they ever said about it. After our memory box collapsed many years later, I may as well talk about when I confronted my parents. And I will let you know kind of what may have been going on with them. It was very eerie. Before I do that, I'll say that there were several goals that the CIA had in mind, or MKUltra had in mind. One was mind control, and you've mentioned that. But the other one was interrogation techniques. How do you interrogate people and get them to reveal secrets? If you've got a Russian agent or a Chinese agent. And the other one is, how do you prevent American agents, if captured, from revealing what happened, what their mission is, what they're up to?
Always a justification for their insidious experiments.
Right. So their idea was to create a split personality and have the subperson, the whole born identity stuff is kind of like that. You put in a subpersonality that knows the mission, but the primary personality does not know the mission.
Wow.
And that was, Kesner gets into, that kind of stuff. That's so. And we'll get into it later, but they had other objectives that had to do with the psychic realm, psychic spying, reading minds, and all that. So that was a kind of a where they were, I think, particularly interested in the shamans. So, and then reaching into other other dimensions with these psychedelic drugs, gateway into the divine. So when I confronted my father, we didn't know it was MKUltra at that time yet. It's before, this was just before the Clinton Commission, the radiation experiment commission, made things public. But we remembered all the details, so I brought him up and described it to him, and his reaction right away was very bizarre. He said, "Well, that sounds like the kind of program your mother would have put you into when I was in the Korean War." I said, "Well, I wasn't born when you were in the Korean War. This was the summer of 1958. You were there." "Well, I don't know anything about that." And then he glanced over his shoulder, and no one else was in the house, and he knew it. And then he began to whisper in a totally different voice and just say, "Those were fine people who ran that program, but they couldn't control their dark impulses." And then his voice would go to normal. "I don't know what you're talking about." And he went back and forth.
That's okay. So you were an adult at this point when you're having this conversation with him. Oh, yeah. And so I don't want to get too personal here, but were you close to your father? In other words, was this kind of reaction shocking, out of character, or because if my
I would say it was certainly shocking and out of character, although I had on one or two rare occasions, and so had my sister, encountered this other person that had a different voice and brought up really disturbing stuff that was completely out of character. I mean, I remember I was just like shocked. So I'd had at least one or two instances of that, where that had occurred before. But it was very brief. And but my sister he came to visit my sister, and that character came out while he was there, and she couldn't believe it. So but I just thought he's a split, and maybe he was always a split. Maybe there's other reasons. Maybe it wasn't the CIA that created this split character.
Do you think he was ever experimented on?
Well, that's why I think I got the feeling they were monkeyed with. Gosh. I got the feeling that the CIA tried to get us. I think they were promised money too. I can't be sure. And again, I don't know any of this with a certainty. And the reason why my book is a fiction is because I can't be certain about my memories. They gave us I was 4. The memories were repressed for 30 years. Psychedelic drugs, isolation, electric shock. I will say, though, that we remembered these things many times independently, like that we were in jail cells, and we had the exact same memories, which sort of made us believe it. And then when that Clinton, testimony occurred to that radiation experiments, those people described the exact same things we experienced. So that's when we began to think it was true. But so I think my feeling is with my mother is that also she flew into a rage when I brought it up. You were not out of my sight for 3 minutes the whole time you were growing up.
Oh goodness!
No, I went to Boy Scout camp. I spent the night at other people's house.
It sounds like they had some guilt, is what it
absolutely, yeah. They had guilt.
Okay.
And that could have caused the memories to be repressed. One of the techniques that helped us confirm our memories is that we had an earlier. Well, I'll get into that story when I talk about how the memories broke down.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think we were in the program, I'm guessing, the summer of 1958.
Okay.
And my sister remembered that she was a very popular. I wasn't yet in school, but at 8 years old, she was in school, and she said I was a very popular kid. I loved school. And then one day I woke up and I couldn't remember the whole summer. And then I was a frightened girl in school. I didn't like to talk, stayed in the back of the class. So there's, And the other thing I did to test this out is I knew my mother took constant pictures, of us growing up, um, and I want to point at this point that I do have a website, BillYarborough.com, BillYarborough.com website. I actually have a picture in there of that I think was taken, right after I was out of the program, but they were all dated by the developer at the store that dated them, and so I knew she had a trunk full of this stuff, and so and also my grandmother, who lived in Germany when I visited her one time, had quizzed me extensively about what things were like that summer, that time period. She said, what were your parents like? And this was before the memory box collapsed. She said, what were your parents like? She said, did they do weird things? Wondering why she was asking me these questions, and I couldn't, my head started spinning, but I couldn't remember anything. And then she said, well, the letters she wrote were very weird and almost incoherent.
Interesting.
So, that's why we invited you to come to Germany in the summer of '59, so we could make sure you're okay.
Very interesting.
And somehow both of them got very normal, by 1960. Very normal. But I went to that trunk, and there were pictures in 1958, many pictures of January, February, March, April, none from May, June, and July. And then they pick up in August. Just no pictures.
Wow. Okay, so if this were to happen in 1958, it's fair to say you were born, 1954, Bill?
Right.
Is that right? Okay.
Right.
And January 54. So if I jump around, never fear, we're going to give you plenty of time to tell this story. But when it really came to the surface for you and your siblings, correct me if I'm wrong, you were 35 years old, October 1989. Explain what happened there to bring all of these memories to the surface.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, you're right in saying that was a very significant time, October of 1989. But that's when we remembered the Indian boy that I mentioned earlier, and I'll get back to that. But no, actually, it started, the very first inkling of it was when my brother he was in his early 20s, 23, and he just had an extreme psychotic episode. He had been meditating. Up until that point, he'd been normal. But often they say that's if somebody's going to have psychotic breaks and develop mental illness, frequently it occurs. Certainly, that's what the therapist told me that he had over the years at that age, around that age. I mean, obviously, there's exceptions to that, but that's a typical time.
So hold on a second. This is very interesting. So he was early 20s. So if he was born in 56-ish, so now we're talking about late 70s then. He has a psychotic episode. You said it was while he was meditating?
He was just, during that period, he was doing lots of meditation, lots of yoga.
So if he had stayed, and I realize this is speculative, but if he had just stayed, down here with the rest of us, then maybe this stays blocked for his entire life for the most part. But I'm hung up on this. Meditation got him to a place where, I guess, did he access some of these repressed memories from being 2 years old?
Yeah, what his therapists feel is that he accessed the memories and they came back too fast, overwhelming. They overwhelming his psyche. The other thing is he was only 2 years old.
Right.
So he was much more vulnerable. And his therapist have told me, at that age, it would be much more damaging. And that he managed to keep it together into his early 20s. Part of this is linked to the Indian boy. The Indian boy did a lot of things to try to lessen the impact of what was going on to us that the people running the program didn't know about, because he was our guard. They had brought him up to use him in psychedelic experiments, but I think he faked. He had mind-altering plants, I think, back in Mexico. So he knew how to.
And how old was he, this Indian
14.
boy who was your guard?
14. 14. I believe he was 14. And I think they were interested in him because, my sister was in their psychedelic. Yeah, they didn't do the same things with us. They were trying to groom my brother to become a military type person. They were trying to groom my sister they were giving her psychedelics. She was one of the kids they were just giving because this mind expansion stuff. I mean, Sidney Gottlieb, who ran MKUltra, you need to understand the duality of this whole program and of him. On one hand, he meditated, went with his wife to India to help the people in the leprosy camps. He was into the evolution, conscious expansion in positive ways. Yet on the other hand, he hired all these Nazis and oversaw all of these experiments. So, it's just a weird duality. It's just one extreme and then the other extreme. And so I think he was interested in, I'm guessing. I never could understand why this boy was in the program until I read Stephen Kesner's book. I said, well, what was he doing there? This kid was very advanced. He was, he knew how to do shamanic journeys and things like that. And when I read that book, then I found out how interested they were in, Indian shamans. So I guess they brought him up there for that reason. But back to your point, I think it was a combination of when my brother started meditating, it may have helped him remember the Indian boy. And then, of course, all the bad things that were also done. And it just became too much.
Yeah, I cannot imagine this. So
when you did that, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you talked about confronting your parents, what year was that? Do you know?
Oh yeah, no, I confronted my father in the 80s. It would have been around 1985, something like that. They came down to visit us for Thanksgiving, and then my wife made sure she took my mother off. I didn't want my mother around or our kids around, so and that's when it was actually the late 80s. Excuse me, the late 80s.
After the session in October of '89, is that right? Or
no,
it was before that.
Actually, let's see. It would have been after the session in October of '89. So we moved from Texas. We lived in Texas at the time. We moved from Texas to California in 1990.
So the only thing I'm getting at, Bill, is I don't know when your parents passed away.
Excuse me. It was the 90s. It was the late 90s. I shouldn't have said late 80s.
Okay. No, that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, late 90s.
So 1989, the memories surface in the therapy sessions. Late 90s, you confront your parents. How long from the confrontation of your parents to their passing? And what I'm getting at is, I'd like to know how long they lived with them knowing that you knew what they were responsible for. And I just wondered, how many conversations were you able to have with them about what you went through as a child?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. They died fairly rapidly after those conversations. I confronted my mother a number of years later, after I confronted my father, and he passed. They both passed away within a year after those conversations.
Wow. Okay.
And I mean, they were in their 80s, but going back real quick.
Yes, please.
I had mentioned that 1989 was when we remembered the Indian boy, but actually, going back to my brother's psychotic episode, he made a lot of statements, and then I had a memory that kind of came out of nowhere. He told me to read this book, and I don't want to get into everything that's in the book, but I began to remember that as a child I was at this big, terrifying place, but it just was so disconnected to what I remembered about my childhood that I just let it go. So that was in '79. but that was the first time I had a dim inkling. And then in 1986, my sister, while she was sleeping, had a vision in which she was told we had repressed the memories of an important part of our childhood. And she tried to remember but couldn't. It was too terrifying. And the vision said, your entire lives will change if you remember this. Go from a dark course to a positive course. And she couldn't do it. And then it finally said, wake up your brother and tell him, and he will remember. So she woke me up in the middle of the night, told me about the vision. And actually, it wasn't the first repressed memory that surfaced was not of the MKUltra program. It was of my mother being in a psychotic state around that same, just after we were released from the MKUltra program, in which she tried to kill us with a butcher knife.
Ah, jeez.
And so as my sister and as I began to remember this, my sister was wisely said, okay, put it in your mind exactly where you were standing, I was standing, our brother was standing, where my mother came from, what was she doing, what was the lighting like. Let's get it completely filled out, because we don't want to be feeding each other things that we suddenly remember, because she knew about the fact that you got to be very careful with this stuff. So we did, and then we compared notes, and it was exactly the same thing to the T.
Gosh.
Okay. And our mother came out of it. We were in the dining room. It was night. It was dark in the dining room, but the kitchen light was on. She was carrying a butcher knife, and she came toward us. And then our father came in and stopped her. But and then actually years later, to my mother's enormous credit, when my brother first confronted her about this knife incident, she flew into a rage, and she called me up and said, how could you and your sister tell your brother this? He's mentally ill. It's very disturbing. Nothing like that happened. But to her enormous credit, 4 years later, she wanted to meet with me in private, and she said the memory came back.
There was
so I said, okay. I said, I had never described what happened to her, nor had my brother. So I said, so describe it in detail. What do you remember? And it was identical. So that really confirmed that the things that happened in 1958, we could compare notes with each other, fill it out, and that actually the perpetrator who did it would confirm it to the T.
Wow. Okay.
So we developed, when we began to remember the MKUltra stuff, in 1988, they started to come out. And oddly enough, it was my brother. I brought my brother down to San Antonio. I had him placed in a mental hospital. He'd been in mental hospitals before, but I wanted to get him away from my parents. And they wanted, it was very hard on them to handle him. So I put him into a really good mental hospital in San Antonio and near where I lived. And then we began to do therapy sessions and things. And, we actually, it wasn't in therapy that my sister, and then my brother began to share the stuff, and then I began to remember it, and then my sister began to remember it, and the same thing, independently remembering the jail cells. My sister was swept up in the late 60s counterculture movement, so she had a lot of experience with psychedelics, as a teenager, and she got out of that, but she was totally into that. And so when we began to remember things, she said, I know what it's like to be in psychedelics, and I'm remembering that's what was going on back then.
Oh my goodness.
Which we thought was very weird.
Yeah.
This was before we knew they were doing stuff like that. And and the memory blocks just continued to roll out.
I bet it's a constant thing in your life today, right?
Yeah, they continue to come out periodically. But the interesting thing is we had an intensive in 1989, October of 1989, going back to your date. So it's sort of hard for me to describe this. It's filled with lots of emotion, but
Well, let's stop right there. Hang on a second, Bill. That's one thing I want to be clear on. Please don't feel compelled to discuss anything that you're not comfortable with discussing.
yeah,
I'm not in your shoes.
yeah,
I don't know what you went through exactly. I did want to ask you, and let me just get this out of the way now. I did want to ask you one question that you can answer, obviously, however detailed you want. But one of the things that I'm trying to figure out in my own head is if the greater good is to train our agents and our super soldiers to battle communist threats around the world, and we have to do these mind control experiments to make sure that they're really equipped, that these children in 1958 were helping someone help in the Cold War in 1990. I'm trying to figure out, because there is a sex aspect to this. And again, you don't need to get into your own situation if that's even applicable here, Bill. But what is that all about? Is that just some depraved individuals on the side that see vulnerable children, pedophiles that are just trying to satiate this nasty desire? Or is that part of this? Is there a science to it, for lack of a better word?
Well, my therapist in San Antonio, I've been very fortunate to have great therapists. But this stuff started to unfold when he was my therapist, and he had been in the Army, a therapist in the Army treating soldiers for post-traumatic stress syndrome. And essentially that's what I was suffering from, post-traumatic stress. And he said that the Nazis he did some research on Nazi Germany while he was there and what they were doing. And he said the SS, one of the key things that the SS did was they tried to link violence to sex. And, I'm pretty sure that this guy that abused me was a former SS officer at Dachau, or one of the other camps.
So sorry.
And so there was some sort of perverted psychology that developed out of Nazi Germany, and those experiments. Again, this is speculation. I have not definitively read it, but it seems to have been common, that some, and of course, they used a lot of prostitutes, adult women. The CIA hired lots of prostitutes. They had prostitutes walk the streets of San Francisco and New York and lure men into these safe houses where they would dope them up with psychedelics, with, of course, without their permission and consent, and then film them and observe them for the next 5 days.
Those were the double mirrored rooms.
Exactly. So, I mean, they certainly use prostitutes. Maybe some of the, I don't know to what extent this was sanctioned. I don't think what they did to me and how they programmed me was sanctioned by the CIA. These Nazis, well, it's in my book. I was programmed to become president and free Eastern Europe and East Germany from Soviet domination. From the time I was a young kid, I was obsessed with that. I was going to go into politics. So I don't think that was anything that the CIA was into, but they brought over these ex-Nazis, and that obviously would be something they would be obsessed with, wanting to do that. They thought that, so that's an aspect in my book.
That's
interesting. And perhaps this interest came from somewhere else, but sort of makes sense. So as far as the child sex, part of it is that, and then part of it is, if you're running a group that's completely lawless and unethical, you're going to attract bad actors because they know they can get away with things there.
Yeah.
They know they have a license to abuse. So I think it's probably several things that causes this linkage. I don't think I think if the CIA sanctioned the use of kids in sex things, I think it would be to, entrap people, because that's how they use prostitutes. But a lot of this was done on each other in the CIA. Some of those guys were into kids, so there's no question. I'm convinced that more than one of the people that were in that program, they were just, into that. And so they were just, this was a great way for them to do it. So I think that's part of it.
Okay.
But going back to that experiment, October of 1989. No, I can share it. It's just emotional to share. But the net effect is all positive. It's that our therapist said something. We went through 7 days of intense therapy, all three of us. Before we did it, he said, I think there's something that hasn't come up that needs to come up. Well, we went through 7 days and it didn't come up, and he shared with us what it was he was expecting. And he said, everything I know about the psyche is that the three of you, and my brother, even to some extent it's true there, but particularly my sister and I, shouldn't be as functional as you've been. I mean, he knew that I was incapable of having a permanent relationship. That was one of the damages done by the program. He knew that. But I had a good job. My sister was a successful in her career, and so he said, you should have had a countervening positive influence to have survived. So you're really strong people. And I felt hollow, empty. No, we're not really strong people. So that night, two key things happened. My sister was going to fly back to New York, or Connecticut rather, the next day. She flew to LaGuardia and then would drive to Connecticut. But she said, you live a lonely lifestyle. You're obsessed with the past. All you do is write and pursue the past. You don't have a girlfriend. I'd had a girlfriend for many years, but not been. But it was more of I knew I could never have a true partnership. And so you just need to get a dating service. You need to join a dating service. And I thought, not in 1,000 years. She wrote down the number of the dating service, and she said, you need to call this number. And I said, no way, to myself, not in 1,000 years. So I take a nap, and then I get up, and I said, let's go for a ride. I said, what did you feel when our therapist said, you're really strong people? And she said, hollow, empty, it's not true.
Lasting damage.
And then we began to figure out, was there a positive influence? And then at the exact same instant, we both remembered the Indian boy. And it was really an earth-shaking change. I said out loud, I just felt the cold blanket of pure intellect lift from my soul. And when we compared notes, we both essentially remembered his death. And so we fell into the state of deep mourning for someone we knew nothing about. Wow. But then the memories began to come back in a tidal wave. I mean, just so many things. And now he's in the first book, a character based on him, and he's in there some, but the second book is going to get into him in a lot more detail. But he was a phenomenal individual.
And he was protecting you, and his role was to guard your cell.
Yeah, guard our cell.
14-year-old boy, and you witnessed his death there.
Yeah, this Nazi guy, the Nazi guy, the sex abuser, the really bad one, worse than the others. He forced us to. So but the next day, I knew I could have a relationship. And a month later, I went to the dating service.
Uh-huh.
Then a month later, I met my wife.
All right. Okay. Very good. And I definitely want to talk about your life after
Sure.
1989, and we
Right.
have a lot of ground to cover from that
Sure.
period. I do want, and this might be speculation here, but before we get too far away, Kara has two questions here. I don't know, Bill, if you have this answer. I don't know if anyone has this answer, but is it possible, Kara asks, that this is still happening today and we just don't know about it?
Well, after having memories like this, I would say anything is possible.
No kidding. No
I
kidding.
never would have thought that was possible. The person
Sure.
was before
Yeah.
this started to come back. And I think, and I emphasize, it's just not the CIA who did this. Many prestigious institutions in the 1950s did experiments like that. Now, many of those experiments were more banal, not all that bad that they did, like, how to learn a foreign language. All of the, not all of the MKUltra projects were of this nature. Many of them were, but not all. So, but they got a hospital. They got a hospital in Canada, one of the most well-known cases where Dr. Cameron at the McGill Institute took, and I met the guy. They took this guy and they did all the stuff they said: constant electric shock, constant psychedelic drugs, constant isolation. He was a patient. This guy was president of the American Psychiatric Institute and the World's Institute. He was extremely prestigious. He goes there because he thinks he's getting the best doctor in the world, and this gets done to him. So I met his son, and he was a guy very involved in human rights and was putting on a big human rights conference. Actually, Amazon made a documentary about the program, and he was the only person. He was involved with the group that was the only ones to successfully sue the CIA and win over MKUltra.
Wow.
So he spent 7 years in Washington, D.C. working on this. And it turned out, what they found out, that what shocked him, he was a Canadian citizen, and this was done in Canada, but what really shocked him is that he found out the Canadian government knew about it and was very involved too back then.
Oh,
So this paranoia was all over the world, in the free world, and so this applies to certainly our government, but also other institutions. I think the best thing, the failure that went on with the CIA is that there was no oversight. The Senate, it was brought up, should the Senate have oversight over they had oversight over the CIA's funding, but not over the CIA activities. And Senator Mike Mansfield from Montana tried to pass a law that we should look into what they're up to, but it didn't pass because once again they used they're fighting communism. We gotta let them be. And I do want to echo there's a lot of bad actors, and I have little doubt that what went on in Russia and China also was along this line.
Sure.
But,
we're supposed to be better than them.
Yeah, and I've met a number of CIA agents, and they do a lot of really good things. Yeah. But when things go secret, and people can't get exposed to, that's when you need to be really careful. So, but I have not done extensive research on what the CIA is doing today. I'll tell you this though: after MKUltra, there was a movie that George Clooney was involved with. He starred in it, and I think he directed and produced it, called Men Who Stare at Goats. And it was about the psychic experiments done, subsequent to that, remote viewing, and all kinds of strange things. So this movie, Men Who Stare at Goats, is based on a nonfiction book, although they didn't really spell out that it was true, and it seems just really bizarre. But I met a woman who was in that program, and she said she knew everybody in the movie, not the actors, but who they were portraying. And she said, absolutely, yeah. They wanted to be able to walk through walls, stare at people and make them die. That's Men Who Stare at Goats. They're practicing if they can kill the thing just by a stare.
Wow.
So that
I need to see that movie.
Yeah, that came out in the 90s. Ted Koppel, Nightline. All these rumors were flying around that they were doing remote viewing and spying in the Soviet Union, and with these psychics, and they came out onto the Ted Koppel Nightline and said it's true. We are doing that. And they actually eventually released the manual. And the reason why this is kind of significant with my story is that my sister actually had that talent. Not when she can do it on command, but she would wake up, see some assassination in Europe, describe it in detail to her husband, turn on the TV, and it happened just like she saw it.
Wow.
So,
wow.
So this is that other realm of what they were into, and apparently they did not the method that they released. I want to emphasize on remote viewing that the method they were using were not anything like what MKUltra did. Nothing like that. It was just things to do with your mind to put you in a state where you can connect with something bigger than you. I haven't done it. My sisters read the manual, so they weren't the kind of human abuse, but they were into really bizarre.
Right. And
maybe not bizarre. Who knows? I've known psychics, and they can do. I'm just blown away by what they can do sometimes. So.
I think as I hear you talk about for the last hour plus about what you experienced and what our government is doing, it's a good rule of thumb to apply this to any thought that involves our government. Never overestimate a government or our government's ability to do evil.
Right.
The more I have conversations like this, Bill, the less and less. I mean, don't get me wrong. This is a shocking story, and absolute evil has been perpetrated on innocent, unsuspecting people such as yourself. But it's almost, it feels like it's the rule, not the exception, and that is soul crushing for a freedom-loving American who believes in the Bill of Rights, believes in the Constitution, believes in our democratic republic and our form of government, that this happens in so many areas, and it's still jaw-dropping every time you hear one of these stories.
Yeah, no, you're right. We travel a lot, and we hear stories of things that go on in other countries. I love history. This has gone on all through history.
Sure.
It's not unique to the United States.
Yeah.
This is something that, unfortunately, look at the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Some people would, one woman said to me, so how could this have been secret that kids were abused until it came out? And I said, well, look at the Catholic Church. The abuse that went on with the altar boys for years. The movie Spotlight's a great movie. It shows how the Boston Globe exposed it. But it had been going on for decades.
Yeah.
In many, many towns, and was never come to light. So you just got to be aware that these things can happen. The Catholic Church does wonderful things in any institution, corporate, nonprofits, educational. It's not immune to human nature.
Yeah, and I want to bring up a previous guest several times on this program. Colonel Towner Watkins has spoken to us about Operation Gladio on multiple occasions, and the Catholic Church's involvement with the CIA and the mob. And again, heinous stuff that is shocking when you hear it. But it just becomes part of our American story, and it's so sad and it's so depressing. I will say this is another interesting point by Kara. I don't know, Kara, you might be onto something. Could that be what's really happening right now at Area 51? Just a thought. The kind of stuff that you went through. That's, who knows, Kara? That nothing would be shocking, right?
Yeah, that's possible. But I will kind of mention that in my novel, my brother, sister, and I remember what appears to have been aliens.
Wow.
Now, it could have come from a psychedelic experiments because I read the book Breaking Over the Head, and if you read about what people experience with psychedelics, they frequently see things like that. They encounter that. So, my book, the way my book is designed is that I don't know with any certainty when we start getting into the paranormal, what some of this stuff really is. But I do put out several possible explanations for people to choose for themselves. But we did have common memories of this thing. It was, and it was only 2 occurrences with my sister and I and brother. But yeah, I mean, who knows? Area 51. I mean, you're aware of what's going on in the Senate, right? In the U.S. Congress with regard to the unidentified anomalous phenomenon.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So it looks like our elected representatives believe something's going on there.
Yeah. Right. So let's talk about some of the, I guess, effects on you that you are comfortable getting into. Some are major, some maybe not as major. I find it interesting that you could never pronounce the word scissors. And you think it's related to what?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I would always say I could not pronounce it. My wife, my sister, and I were terrified of butcher knives. We just didn't want to even touch them. We had that in common. So when I remembered our mother with the butcher knife, of course, that began to cause that phobia to go away.
But scissors were involved. How so with the MKUltra testing?
I think it could have been my mother as well.
Oh, okay.
Threatening to cut things off.
Oh gosh. Okay, I got you. Oh man. So I get you now. And then you mentioned the butcher knives and your mom's attempt at murdering you. I mean, just man, I am so sad for you.
Yeah, and the other reason why I think she could have been monkeyed with, and not necessarily by the quote CIA.
Mm-hmm.
I think that these Nazis had this little strange cult going on. We have memories of that somehow they got my parents sucked into it. A bizarre cult that was into sort of dark things. And so that's in the book, but
okay.
It's hard to know for sure what, I think that some of the stuff they did to us was clearly the CIA agenda, like my brother becoming a super soldier, the psychedelic experience with my sister. Again, me freeing Eastern Europe, I don't think they would have done something like that. It wouldn't make any sense, programming a kid free Eastern Europe, as president. So, but it makes perfect sense that the ex-Nazis would do that.
Right. Yeah, get communism out of there. Okay. Sadly, your brother passed away young. Connected to this.
Well, he was a constant smoker.
Okay.
And that frequently happens to people in his state. They need the nicotine. So they never could figure out what he died of. He just collapsed. But his life was a sad one.
Yeah.
And I was sort of his, I had him live with me for a while, and then I would always find homes for him. Yeah, my parents paid a lot of money. The government paid money because, he was judged, Medicare because of the condition he was in. So, so that was sad. But
I want to talk about this because I will get back to some more questions I have about MKUltra. But let's stay on this line of conversation with your healing, because I would probably be like your brother, and I'm not at all comparing me to someone who has been tortured throughout their childhood. But what I'm saying is, mentally, if I realized that this had happened to me, I don't think that I would be able to move on. and obviously therapy, a lot can be said for that. But how have you been able to heal? For lack of a better word, how have you been able to have a successful? You've been married 34 years, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
That I mean, I'm happy for you, honestly, and I just wonder how tough has that been, and explain how you've been able to have I don't know anything about your life, but for lack of a better word, a normal existence as opposed to your brother.
Yeah, well, one thing is he was younger, more vulnerable. The psyche was more damaged than mine and my sister's. Number two, and my sister lived a relatively normal life too. Number two is we were only there for 3 months. I mean, many of these kids that testified, were sucked in. And I've talked, some people have reached out to me who believe they were in MKUltra. And they were in for a period of years, so that's a lot harder. And we also had a very positive influence who some of the best experiences of my life occurred at the same time. The places, the states of consciousness he could put us into. He used music, and I'll get more into him later, but music, dancing, because we were in, he would do that when they were gone during the day, with us. And so, I mean, he was just a very loving and wonderful, so that helped us. But I was messed up, and, I used to have stutters, and I was terrified of authority figures. I knew I couldn't have a permanent relationship. But I think I healed slowly. This stuff came back gradually with me over a period of years. So the psyche was better able to integrate the changes that these created. It's not just remembering, it's also emotionally releasing it. And we'll talk later about all these wonderful tools that it had available that helped me release the impact. And I'm not fully done there. It's still trapped in the body, I think.
Oh, I bet it's a lifelong thing for you, man.
Oh, yeah, it's been a lifelong thing. I've been doing various forms of therapy all my life, and ever since I remember this stuff. So, I think that was very helpful. And what the therapists teach is, you don't want to go too fast. Let things come out. If you have this kind of severe trauma, I know guys that were veterans from the Vietnam War and had been subjected to extreme trauma, and it's better to do it gradually.
Yeah, I bet. What were you just alluded to? Music playing a role in your MKUltra torture? How so?
Yeah, no, music was a positive aspect. The Indian boy, we were kept in the basement in a jail cell, so he had a portable record player.
Oh, wow.
And he knew how to do what they call trance dancing. Sometimes there's other names for it, where your mind goes into a state of consciousness where it connects totally with the music, and then suddenly when you dance, you're not making your body move, something else is.
Interesting.
And if you think of native shamanic traditions in many cultures throughout the world, you always see them dancing to drums, doing this kind of wild dance to drums. It's essentially a spiritual. It makes you feel really good, and it can help. So he did that with us. And when I remembered him, I started doing it. And I don't anymore because I'm older now, and I don't want to damage my legs and things like that, because this can get really wild. But I listen to the music and do it in my head. And I know a number of people who do that. They find, and it was interestingly when we remembered him and we remembered doing this dancing, a book was published that same year that said the teachings of an urban shaman. And it's basically this woman took the shaman's dancing and then applied it to modern Western music. So she had, it was sort of eerie. We've had a lot of eerie coincidences like that occur with this. So, that was, and also having very good therapists, extremely good therapists. And then my wife, has been a very powerful influence. But, I think I made it through my mid-30s with a fairly successful career, but never thinking I could really have a family life. And I think things would have gotten worse and worse and worse if these things had never come out. But I will say that, you don't have to go through these traumas that I'm talking about to be helped by some of these techniques. One of them is called EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique, or tapping. It's really big, and they're major hospital systems are now beginning to bring it on. Schools. And we'll talk. When we get into the healing topic, I'll talk about that.
Yeah.
But it can help just lots of people with all kinds of things, and not just.
Let's what was that called? That technique, EFT, you said?
EFT, Emotional Freedom Technique.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about some of these techniques that have helped you? Because I would love to go through them with you as this incredible road of healing. Take us through some of the I guess techniques that you've used to heal.
Sure. Well, first of all, initially I got a lot of really good help from traditional psychotherapy or talk therapy. We engaged in that. That resulted ultimately in the memory of MKUltra. We remembered my mother's stuff on her own, but once we got into therapy, the MKUltra memories came up, and the breakthrough remembering the Indian boy occurred the day after our long seven-day intensive, the last day.
Have you ever tried to find out? I'm sorry to interrupt you, and because please, I want you to go through the list of these healing techniques. This is going to be fascinating. But obviously, that 14-year-old Indian boy plays such a large part in your memories, and was such an area of comfort for you. I imagine, right, during the experience. Have you ever tried to figure out his identity?
Well, we figured out. I got a lot of confirmation about where he said he came from and the kind of tribe he lived in. And I think I don't want to go away from where we're going, but just to say that everything he described about where he came from, which I wondered, that doesn't really fit with Mexico, and how could a 4-year-old know that? Well, then we found a place just like it, and everything was exactly how he described it. Exactly. Wow. So I'll share that story for later. But his personality just began to come back to us, even with our brother. And my brother, when I started reading him my novel in the presence of his therapist, he started to get a lot better. And they commented at the halfway house. But he wasn't ready to go there for so much of his life. He just refused. He was very involved when it first came out, but then he didn't want to go back to it. And so he saw a therapist, but he wouldn't get into this stuff. And but toward the end of his life, he would, and it helped him. So talk therapy is one of them. It did a lot of good. I think the next most significant thing I would bring up is hypnotherapy. And by the way, it's going to be fully set up on my website by the end of the week. But I did write an article with a therapist who had 40 years experience as a therapist and teaches therapists hypnotherapy and EFT and other things. So we wrote a series of articles for a local magazine on healing called Emotional Health Articles. And we talk about them in there. So if people want to learn more about them, it's a high level overview, on several of those techniques that are going to be on my website, but for people that are interested. But there's many of these practitioners, hypnotherapists and EFT practitioners all over the place. But in hypnotherapy, what's eerie is, of course, MKUltra used it too. They used hypnosis, and I could actually remember being hypnotized.
Oh boy.
They used hypnosis. That was a significant part of their technique. And but in this healing hypnosis, they guide you to a relaxed state. It's sort of like, if you think about it, if you're driving your car and your thoughts are just someplace, and then suddenly you realize you're 30 miles further down the road and you don't even remember driving. That's that kind of state between wake and sleep, which is really the hypnotic state. And then it's very relaxed. And then the therapist guides you to, my therapist would guide me to some of the trauma that occurred. And then she would have me re-experience it where it didn't happen. It happened a different way, and then it can also, another thing that can be done with hypnotherapy is EMDR. It's a eye movement desensitization reprocessing is what it stands for. So people just long, hard to remember that, but it's EMDR. A lot of therapists use it, and it has to do with, you either they move your eyes or you feel this little buzz in your fingers going back and forth between your left and right. And so it gets the right and the left brain working together better, where you then can process some of these bad experiences and then go to a relaxed state of consciousness, to just sort of let it go and actually forgive predators. So, but I think the one that's been the most significant for me is EFT, emotional frequency technique.
Is that this stuff you were doing earlier?
Yeah, tapping is also frequently known as tapping. There's a big website called Tapping Solutions, and they've got a lot of stuff on it. Basically what it is you say, so even though I have this memory of my mother pulling a knife, for example, I deeply and completely accept myself. Okay, so it's what they call a karate chop, and then it's based on Chinese meridian points, and then you just tap, terrifying memory of the knife, 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 terrifying memory of the knife. When you go through that, and then it goes here and here. I'm going to have on my website, a picture of all those points, and all over the internet, and all kinds of videos demonstrating done different ways. But what it did for me, I'll just give you some examples, and I'll tell you a little bit about the background of EFT. My boss said, you can write very well, but, in meetings, you don't have any confidence. You're hesitant. And so people don't really, have confidence in what you're saying. And you need to develop a better delivery. And so I used EFT every time before I had to go into a meeting, because most of them were in conference calls. The company I worked for was spread all over the country. And I did it just regularly before all those meetings. And I noticed I was getting better and better. And then a year later, he just said in the meeting, if everybody on my team, Bill gives the best presentations by far. So that's why I say a lot of people can benefit by these things. They don't necessarily have to have gone through what I'm talking about.
I see, yeah.
The number one fear at times has been public speaking. It's just very widespread. And it was a huge fear with me. I would break out. My palms would sweat.
Sure.
My voice would stutter. I even froze up one time and couldn't speak.
That sounds like a nightmare, like a literal nightmare.
Right.
That I've had, like on the radio. It's like you can't talk.
Well, that's because the number two guy in the corporation showed up while I was speaking, and I wasn't expecting it. It really helped me overcome that, and my wife and I are developing a technique of doing that in groups, which makes it much more powerful. So But there's a lot of other things, Reiki, parts therapy, there's, they say that we inherit trauma from our ancestors. One of the biggest things in therapy now is ancestral healing. And, I have scientist friends, who I mentioned are medical researchers. And I read about this. I had a hard time believing it, but
right.
Eugenics, is where actually through DNA expression, trauma of your ancestors are handed down to you.
That is so I've only recently been made aware of that as well. And so you're convinced then now, or?
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure. Well, I mean, if I look at my family, my both my parents were, my father was in the U.S. Army, and he interviewed the guys running Dachau. He saw the horrible things. He never wanted to talk about what he did at Dachau, never. And my mother was in Dresden, Germany, when it was bombed, the firebomb.
Wow.
At the railroad station. And then, my grandparents, World War I, and the American Civil War. So, and you take a lot of families, you're going to find, descendants from slaves, or people that were in total poverty, who knows, so so yeah, I think that's real. And you can use things like EFT to tap on. If you, I think where it becomes apparent, this is where I would say it might be a factor. If you can't think of anything in your life that makes you very uncomfortable about a situation because you had a really good childhood and you don't quite understand why it could be that. Now, in the article we wrote, we give a lot of explanations of what could be, going on there, because no one knows for certain. Mm-hmm. And even if it's not that, if you get better, you get better. With a lot of these, past life regression is another thing people use. To remember past lives and to overcome traumas. And that's in the therapy field.
Interesting.
And I've seen it do remarkable things for people. There's a lot of different explanations as to what it really is. It may not really be a past life. It could be just like a dream, or it could be, an archetype. There's all kinds of explanations. So what I've tried to do with my book and future books is I don't want to tell people absolutely what's true. I mean, these things that MKUltra did, that's true. But when we get more into the paranormal and some of these, psycho-spiritual healing techniques, they're helpful. And if they're helpful, that's what counts.
And refresh my memory. Reiki, is that a kind of meditation? What is that exactly?
It's really a hands-on. You don't touch, you don't touch the people's faces, but you put these symbols in your mind, and these sayings, and you repeat them, and then you put your hands right over. And I did Reiki for years. It's very good to help you in a generalized way, but things like hypnotherapy and EFT can be much more specific to an issue. But Reiki is, medical studies have shown it's good. I mean, things like gratitude, just every day saying, I'm grateful for this, or I'm grateful for that, making that a practice. We have an article about that. It's proven to work really well compared to other methodologies.
Am I to understand that one of the keys to healing, and this is where you're going to lose me, man. I mean, the meditation, that's fine. The tap, that's fine. But are you telling me that exercise, am I going to have to exercise to heal? Come on now.
Yeah, well, let me put it this way. Up until memory box, and even after the memory box collapsed, I think one reason why I did as well as I did, even before I dealt with this stuff, is I did regular exercise. I went to the gym a lot. I was president of a foundation or involved with one of the largest regional park in the United States. And we actually commissioned a study that proved statistically that if you let kids go outside in nature, and nature could be the walking around their neighborhood, where there's trees and houses, or going out into a park, the anxiety level will be significantly improved. And it definitely proved that, to the extent that one hospital started using that as a justification for a prescription for the kid, is to let them be outside, outdoors. Yeah, we would sponsor bringing, poor kids into the parks for a week, where they can just, so actually being in nature is a very,
Yeah.
I found, very healing experience.
100%. Yeah.
100%.
And just
But
get outside, get some fresh air, get some sunshine.
exactly.
It'll do wonders for your immune system on top of the mental sanity.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered so much today, Bill. Are there areas that maybe we didn't touch on enough that we need to go back and revisit? Do you think, or have you pretty much covered not only your story, the CIA MKUltra story, and the healing? Is there any area that you want to go back and revisit before we wrap this up today, man?
I'm trying to think if there's a broad topic, that would be good to get into. The whole paranormal, remote viewing, this, alien, whatever that is, all of that, I don't have any definitive answers, but that is a part of our experience. There's a lot of different explanations as to what it could be, So I don't know if that's the kinds of things that are of interest, but I did. There was a very prominent back in the '80s, a very prominent who was best-selling author in the '80s on psychology, and she had this intensive I went to in the 1990s, 7-day intensive where you really, my company paid for it. My boss knew what I'd been through, and very few other people did, but my boss did. So he sent me to this thing, and she fished everything out of me. At the time I didn't know it was called MKUltra, but I described the program, and she fished the alien thing, and you shared it with a group, and she made an interesting comment. She goes, "I've done these intensives all over the world, in many locations, and wherever severe trauma occurs, those things often show up." I don't know what it means. I mean, part of it could be disassociation. I don't know if you know what disassociation means, but when you're subjected to extreme trauma, you leave your body, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whatever definition. So you're suddenly in a different realm. And, so it's very possible that you see things that you would not see in your ordinary state. And I think there's possibly a lot of validity in that.
I have heard about out-of-body experiences from multiple people that I trust, that would have no reason to make something like that up. And it's just there's so much that we don't know that the human brain is capable of. And sadly, that segues back into the CIA and MKUltra and their crazy ass experiments. Let me ask you. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's one other topic I want to hit, but you go ahead and answer your question. Yeah.
Well, you continue. You continue, because mine probably be.
Well, one of the things that is running through my book, and the fourth one is hinted at. Not some people have figured it out, but it'll be definitely very clear in the second book. But this Indian boy, who actually did bring us on out of body experiences, he knew how to guide us.
Wow.
Wow. And again, I'll say, maybe the psychedelic drugs, what did it? But he was a kid that I think was very experienced with these things, because his grandmother, who he said was the most powerful shaman in northern Mexico at the time, taught him a lot of stuff already. So they had all those drugs sitting in the room right next to where our jail cells were. And he could go in there and pluck out whatever he wanted, conceivably. And I think he knew about them. But he was very much into the evolution of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
That our consciousness is evolving. And so that's why meditation, and things of that nature, that where you become present. Authors like Eckhart Tolle and Adeshante, they talk about being present and getting connected to, but they use the term awareness, where suddenly you're kind of observing yourself as opposed to being yourself, where you're connected with something greater than yourself. So there's all kinds of different explanations for that. All of the religions have mystic traditions, all of them, Eastern and Western. When we were in Turkey, we went to see the Sophies dance, in the Muslim religion. And my wife and I kind of know what it likes to get in, how it feels to be in that state. And then when they did that, I could feel it too. It's a really pleasant state, very calming, those kinds of things. But it takes some practice. So, but all of this stuff you really can't put into words.
I bet
you can't.
I was just gonna say. I mean, that's the thing. I think we can all agree that the human mind is capable of so much more than what we allow it to partake in. And if we want to reach these other levels, that is something for the individual to decide.
Right.
That's not something for a government or anybody else to decide for you against your will, without your knowledge. And that is the hideousness of MKUltra and the CIA and these experiments and the Nazis and all of this. People can make those own decisions for themselves if they want to achieve that, and take their own notes and do their own experiments. And I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who do this that are doing it of their own free will. And that's the difference here. It's government deciding for you that is just unacceptable.
Yeah. No, I think the Indian boy kept it to himself because he knew exactly what they were up to. So and then even Stephen Kesner in his book just concludes none of this stuff really worked for national security.
Right.
It didn't really accomplish anything.
Right. Okay. So here's my last question before we part today, Bill. And it's been absolutely fascinating from start to finish, man. I'm so grateful for your time and your willingness to share this story. But my last question is, when you look at the news today through your very unique lens, as an MKUltra survivor, as you see, whenever you see a story come out, and I won't even color my question here. But when you see a story in the news, through your unique perspective, do you see sometimes an individual looking back at you, a subject of a news story, and go, oh my gosh, I can just tell that person has been through what I've been through? Have you ever had that experience where you have seen someone or something happening in the news where you have said, oh my gosh, that's me? I mean, I know exactly, I can tell.
Yeah, well, the way I would frame it is, and not just people in the news, but people that I meet. And I can't say I don't like to say with absolute certainty, but I would use the word suspect. And I would think, I suspect they've been subjected to extreme trauma.
Do we know how many people were subjected to MKUltra experiments?
Oh, thousands.
How many?
Yeah. 1,000. Yeah.
1,000. Okay.
And I mean thousands, and because but
that we know of.
But they destroyed all the records of the people involved, all the names of the people that were experimented upon.
Yeah,
those were certainly destroyed. But I have, there's certain things you just spot.
I bet. Okay.
What it made me was extremely defensive, and it made me extremely paranoid. Sort of a loner, I felt threatened by groups, and so I could go on and on and on, but there could be other reasons, other things to cause that, of course, but it's a real possibility.
Yeah. It's such an intense story, your life and your experiences. And I want everyone, you can go to Amazon and Barnes and Noble. The name of the book is Memories of MKUltra. Also available, yes, through BillYarborough.com.
Well, it's going to be. It's not yet, but it's going to
Okay.
be. But you can go to BillYarborough.com, and then you can get access to so many articles that were written by the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, and
Yes.
foreign countries about MKUltra and mind control in general. They're not all just MKUltra, and then you can also learn more about my novel. One thing about my novel is, the reason why I wrote it as a novel is because I can't be sure of all the things that happen, as I mentioned. But, I didn't want it to be a gross out thing, And so the novel, it should be viewed sort of as it's been called many things. It's been called an historical novel. It's been called a psychological thriller. It's been called a coming of age story, so it's sort of a combination of a number of things. And so it's framed with the one storyline is from the point of view of the guy running the Gateway School, the former Nazi from Germany. He wasn't in the SS. He's not as bad as the SS guy. From his point of view, running this program during the summer of '58, and his interactions with his superiors and his interaction with his subjects and the other people that work with him, so that people get a very clear idea of what happened to these kids, in the summer of 1958. The other story is these kids starting off when they're nabbed, in the museum, but then when they're out of the program but don't remember being in it, and it traces them through elementary school, junior high, leave out high school, and then to college, and then to adults all the way up until when they remember, and then onward as they start healing. So the reader knows what goes on, but the characters don't. And one of the goals there is to give people an understanding of the subconscious or unconscious mind, how it drives behavior, and it may not be a memory you repressed, but it could be a memory you haven't recovered from, and it's still driving your behavior.
Wow.
It's still making you do things until using various different techniques of your own choosing, whatever you're most comfortable with, and if you choose a therapist, getting one you trust. If you have severe issues, you should, get a therapist. I always recommend that. Severe issues, you need help. But like I did. But but I do want people, some people pick up on that. Yeah, they can see how the unconscious mind is just driving these kids, and they don't know it.
And these techniques, are they at the website, BillYarborough.com? As well?
Yeah, it's going to be. Right now.
Okay. Work in progress.
By the end of the week.
Okay.
The emotional health articles will be up. There's 6 of them. There's a lot of other techniques. So just to give you a flavor of the different kinds of therapies available.
Okay.
EFT, hypnotherapy, that kind of stuff. Past life regression, gratitude. So yeah, but
the title of the book, Memories of MKUltra. When is book 2 gonna be released? Any date yet?
No date yet.
It's gonna be a trilogy, right? When it's all said and done.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
Yes.
Cool. Very cool.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Bill Yarborough. And the name of the book again is Memories of MKUltra. Available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and other locations. It's been intense, man. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you opening up and sharing your story with us, Bill. And I hope to talk to you again at some point for sure.
Well, yeah, I would love to do that. And thank you so much for your perceptive questions.
Absolutely.
That was great. And it's available online in those places, many bookstores, actually.
Oh,
So,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm so
online.
tactile. So, but
Not
yeah, you're right.
Not in this bookstore yet, at least. Okay.
Understood.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill. And thanks to all of you for tuning in today. Please be sure to like, subscribe, share. This is a fascinating discussion that I hope that you will share with people that need to hear the story. We'll see you here tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern for the Friday live stream. Going to be a full house with Brad, Rebecca, and Kelly. And I hope you'll be a part of that as well. Thank you so much for making time.
Thank you.